hip-hop being the music that really gave me an identity and changed, you know, the way I felt about the world. And
I read somewhere that you were taught cello by your grandmother.
yeah.
What was the first piece you could play?
Wow, I have no idea what the first piece I could play. I mean, ultimately, I think the first thing you start playing is scales, really. So I can remember painfully doing scales and hating it.
Hating it, but maybe if you look back on it, is there one song or piece that you say that
I can't remember. It was a long time ago. I finished playing by the time I was 12, I think.
No, has it been important for you that maybe
definitely the influence of my grandmother, my grandfather, who I never met, but he was a singer on Radio 2, and he used to be sort of really good friends with people like Tony Hancock, who's a great sort of classic British comedian and part of that group of artists at that period of time, which I suppose must have been in the 50s. And then my grandmother was the first woman to be in the Irish Philharmonic, and then came to London with her husband and from Ireland to teach and play. And my father is a brilliant folk singer, and he used to sing with the Dubliners, which are a very sort of influential Irish folk band, or probably the most influential Irish folk band. And he was a drummer as well, and heavily into classical music. So that influenced his brother is a genius pianist and cello player, and it's a very musical family, and my brother's a brilliant musician as well. So it's definitely rubbed off, and my memories of growing up as a child was always hearing music, whether it be jazz, Art Blakey, to Deep Purple, through to kind of, you know, Queen. Really, it was quite. My dad always had quite an open mind, and then you'd be hearing Chopin or Brahms or Beethoven or whatever. So,
what do they say about your music?
I think that it's interesting that coming from a heavy classical background, that I have there is an element of a classical sort of classical fusion in what we do.
Are you aware when you're producing it, or is it something that you, well, if you listen back to your songs, that you say, hey, maybe this stems from?
I don't think about it very much, but if being asked the question, then yes, you know, considering that where I came from, you know, I've always been surrounded by music. From my earliest memories really are musical, you know, led memories from my family through to being at school and being sort of overwhelmed by the power of electro and hip hop.
Can you say that when you grew up, is there one artist that you were really into?
Yeah, I mean, God, the first thing that just popped into my head was EPMD, but there were so many hip hop acts.
Why? How come?
Just because I just remember it was me and my friend really heavily into EPMD for some period, and it's just the memory has come to my head. But I mean, I remember, you know, it was buying tapes as a kid, and that started. I think the first tapes that I bought there were Street Sounds collections, which were like compilations of American electro records, electro 12 inches and hip hop 12 inches. So early, sort of probably around 86, 87, and all the records that came out at that period, which were things like, you know, there was Grandmaster Flash records and Furious 5, there were Africa Bambaataa records, and then sort of going into things like Cool Mo D, Dougie Fresh, Schoolie D, and then really the sort of heyday was then, you know, Public Enemy records, Run DMC records, EPMD records, all the beginning of Def Jam, LL Cool J, Beastie Boys.
Yeah.
And that was, I mean, it's funny now being asked the questions and looking at that, the fact that hip hop being the music that really gave me an identity and changed, you know, the way I felt about the world and looked at the world. And then growing up with a very sort of classical and jazz-based background, how those two things have fused in my later life.